Hi, and welcome to the Imagine Film Festival 2023 podcast series consisting of 4 episodes that explore this year's festival theme, which is Fantastic Alchemy. My name is Stanley Guzinski, and I'm a features programmer and XR programmer of Imagine Film Festival.
Hi, and I'm Hugo Emerzaal, and I'm a freelance film critic and a curator, and I'm very happy to be part of this podcast series.
And I'm happy that you decided to join us, Hugo, and together we'll be hosting this whole podcast series. But let's begin with the question, why alchemy? Alchemy is in equal terms magic and storytelling, and in that respect, it is very close to the DNA of Imagine, which revolves around fantastic fiction. We began to wonder if it's that historical tradition, or can we actually draw some energy and inspiration from it? Instead of featuring films specifically about alchemy, we asked ourselves what works could be considered alchemical in spirit and help us see what alchemical elements might still be relevant today. We wish to revive the alchemical spirit and invite the audience to look at alchemy not as a historical curiosity, but as a source of inspiration for addressing contemporary challenges through the mix of 4 ingredients: technology, narrative, identity, and substance, which will manifest in film screenings, VR works, conversations, workshops, live events, and podcasts.
Of course. Alchemy was an invitation to learn through diverse means: reading, observing, listening, but also touch, play, destruction, and transformation. And as our society struggles against the dangers of populism, grapples with the development of AI, and comes to terms with the fluidity of identity and gender, we are actually in desperate need of such powerful interdisciplinary paradigm which would help us connect our lived experiences with reliable knowledge.
And if that sounds a bit eccentric and far-fetched, we have this podcast to make it feel less so. In this episode, we explore the topic of substance, focusing on the materials that the alchemical process feeds off, and in particular, the substance of film itself. We will be joined today by guests César Velasco Broca and Karel Doing. César Velasco Broca is a Spanish experimental filmmaker known for his highly eccentric works that fuse alchemical symbols with magic and interest in media materiality, as shown in the short film Alegrías Riojanas, which will be screened at Imagine Film Festival 2023, where César will also have the exhibition of the artworks produced for that film and his feature debut in the making, The Future Testament.
And Karel Doing is an independent artist, filmmaker, and researcher whose practice investigates the relationship between culture and nature by means of analog and organic process, experiment, and co-creation. He has developed a cinematic technique called phytography that combines plants and photochemical emulsion, resulting in unique cinematic works that he will demonstrate during his phytography workshop hosted during the festival.
In this episode, you'll also hear the voice of David Canovas Williams, who's translating from Spanish to English for César Velasco Broca. For the sake of clarity, you'll mostly hear his translations, but occasionally we'll leave a bit of César's Spanish, so you'll get an impression of his passionate statements about cinema, cinephilia, and alchemy. So, Hugo, without further ado, let's dive into conversation.
Let's go.
Hello, it's really great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And speaking about the invitation, because while building the roster of guests for this podcast, we reached out to people and pitched that idea of alchemy to them. And some of them were rather surprised why they were specifically approached from that angle and why their craft or their filmmaking was specifically ascribed to that theme. So I guess maybe the question I would like to ask first is, were you surprised in the first place where we approached you with this question of alchemy with regards to your practices?
O sea, no del todo, porque es cierto que en mis últimas producciones, en los últimos 14 años, sí que he tenido algún tonteo, no sé si tanto con la alquimia, que es algo que directamente, aunque sí que me he leído algunos.
Not really. I wasn't surprised by your request because I've been working for 14 years in these kind of topics. I haven't touched them full on, but maybe just in a more superficial way, like toying with it. But I have explored. I've also been reading some treatises on esoteric knowledge, Gnosticism, That's been for the last 7 to 9 years. So these topics are close to my work, also from a theoretical way.
How about you, Karel?
I also wasn't surprised.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and my work is very much about experimentation and the transformation of materials. And this is something that you can find in alchemy as well. But there's also kind of a limit to the kind of analogy or comparison. And I could talk more about that either now or later.
Yeah, but please do, because you developed this technique called phytography, and at Imagine we will get a chance, and the audience will get the chance to join your workshop, where they will be able to learn firsthand what the phytography is and how to make movies in that manner. Could you elaborate a little bit for people who listen to us what phytography is about? What does it entail, the whole process, but also what's your concept behind this whole technique?
Yeah, in short, it is a technique where you use plants to make images directly on photographic materials. So that can be paper or film. And because I'm a filmmaker, I've been mostly working on motion picture film. So I'm also very interested in the animated image. So the sort of movement that you can get. It goes back to the very beginning of photography, because the moment that photography was invented, people also started to kind of look for ways to enhance the image. So kind of what we call now developer. And then they also used organic materials. So it's something which is kind of from the very beginning of photography. And it came back because then, of course, it became like a giant industry. Kodak was a very huge company at some point, producing all kind of photographic materials, including the chemicals. And then, so we know it as something that comes from a big chemical plant. Not the plant that grows, but the plant with a chimney. And now kind of photography is a sort of minority activity, you could say. Digital photography took over almost completely. Photographic materials are kind of a niche thing. And now artists and experimental filmmakers, they are very interested in a sort of more ecologically aware way to kind of use these techniques. And there the kind of the plants came back in. So that's kind of a little bit of the background. And I came into this because I did a practice-based research project. So and my question was about ecology and cinema, kind of how can we bring those together somehow? Because especially when you think about science fiction films, which might be sort of appropriate also for Imagine as a film festival, this is something that is part of your kind of program, fantasy, science fiction, etc. Especially when you think about science fiction, it's always about technology. And it's always about gleaming skyscrapers and some kind of very kind of synthetic and artificial world. But then kind of my idea was to think about the future, which is organic, which is much more organic, and which is about things that grow, and about humans kind of reconnecting to nature in a sort of futuristic way. I had all these kind of grand ideas, but in the end, kind of the main thing that came out of the whole project was photography, because I started to experiment with all kind of different materials. And that was a sort of alchemic thing, like literally trying things out without knowing what would happen. And then at some point I started using plants, and then I got some very interesting results. So I kind of developed that further.
And I am now curious because at the beginning you said that you also see kind of maybe a limitation of the analogy of alchemy as related to your practice. Where do you see that limitation maybe coming in, just so that we have immediately established that part?
Yeah, I think alchemy is very much about kind of improving the world and improving materials. It's this kind of classic thing, making gold out of lead. And that is something that I definitely do not believe in. I think that's actually very much goes against my ideas about kind of a sort of future in which we reconnect to nature. I think, and that's exactly something that we can have to get rid of. It's not about kind of improving anything. It's actually about accepting that things are somewhat chaotic and flawed and imperfect.
That's pretty interesting because the thing that I notice very much in your work, Karel, is this concept of deterioration, and that there's a beauty in that as well. You know, working with celluloid, and I think that's a thing that Velasco also is probably highly familiar with due to the fact that he often works on 60 millimeter. But there's something so beautiful about the way that you emphasize how celluloid is not a stagnant thing or a material in stasis, that deterioration in itself is a process as well that's beautiful to capture. So how do you relate this idea, would you say that alchemy is improvement, but actually the opposite of improvement might be where something more poetic or beautiful could reside?
Yeah, that comes very much from that whole kind of trying to dig deeper in that kind of question. What is exactly the problem? Why are we at odds with nature? And I think one of the reasons is that we so much like to fix things in the here and now, but then forever. This idea of kind of living forever, our own bodies that kind of fall apart over time. And going against that, it's kind of the super rich who try to kind of literally live forever or extend their lives for centuries. But then also the kind of the production of, let's say, for example, of radioactive materials that stay for centuries in the environment, plastics that stay for centuries as a sort of toxic element within the environment. That's a very human thing. And sort of this acceptance of the imperfection of things and the sort of affinity of life, I think that's an ecological thought.
Interesting, because you touch upon a couple of points, Karel, that Velasco, I think, apply very much to your cinema. One of them is exploring these themes of science fiction without embracing only quote-unquote new technology, actually also embracing, let's say, more archaic technology, or even a form of like technological archaeology, where you explore these kind of like ways that more vintage equipment can be used in a maybe sci-fi framework, and then also fusing that sci-fi framework with this heretic maybe influences of more old fantasy aspects, more, let's say, almost like maybe a Dark Ages lore kind of feeling to it. Where did that interest maybe come from? And also, how do you maybe fuse that with your filmmaking process? Because again, like I said before, you embrace 60 millimeter as well. You show all of these old media objects into your film. You make something that is decidedly new, but also very comfortably plays with the old. So where do you see that combination come in?
Firstly, regarding the like creative practice of making cinema, is a way of isolating reality into smaller pieces and recombining them. And I'm very interested in the 16 millimeter work. I'm interested in the idea of cinema as a corpse. The way of encapsulating the space-time continuum into a physical medium. So if we think about what's the corpse of cinema, there's an analog corpse and there's a digital corpse. But the thing is, if we think about like a cemetery or where cinema would be buried, we would say, okay, if we don't have the technology or to bring out the digital medium, which could be lost, but in the analog space, we can, even if there's everything is lost, there's no technology to read those images. Even if one frame is saved, you could look through it and see it by just seeing the medium through just using light. Imagine if we lost all computers, all silicon was destroyed by some sort of magic, we would still be able to recover those pieces of that corpse of cinema. Cinema really is in depth with photography, because cinema really isn't about moving images. That moving images predated cinema with the praxinoscope or with the like Chinese shadows. But really, if we had to think this in semiotic terms, thinking about what are signs, icons, and symbols, cinema is more related to what a sign is. In terms of, it's like the fingerprint of reality, the fingerprint left by reality. If I killed someone and and there was an animation movie done about that, that couldn't be used as a proof, as an evidence in a trial. But if that same killing was recorded or shot with a 60 millimeter or 35 millimeter camera, that would leave a sign, would leave a witness of something that's real. This depth that we have, that cinema is indebted to time as this fingerprint. And the thing is, the reality where we're currently living isn't cinematic. As you can see in my work, I use all sort of devices like recorders, video cameras, different sort of hardware, and that hardware allows to my characters to move around. This technology, these devices can be used to for communication or to encapsulate time, like a recorder, but also in terms of communication. For example, all in Alegrías Riojanas, my characters, when they need to operate a device, they move around in a cinematic way. And if you remember back in the day when we had landlines, and there was this phone ringing, you had to get up from your city or your couch and go to the phone, and that's cinema. That's where you can follow the character, and it becomes part of the action. So yeah, but nowadays all those technologies have been synthesized into a phone, into a smartphone, and that smartphone, you have it in your pocket, and well, if you get a phone call, you want to check some information, you have to take it out of your pocket, which really isn't a very cinematic movement for me.
Yeah, so we were talking before about the limits of this metaphor or this analogy to alchemy, but what you, Velasco, are highlighting is also, I think, the importance of editing and of mixing all of those different ingredients together. So we have actual physical light that exposes the film, but then we have also digital editing that comes in to play in your films. And in the end, this is this process that merges the digital and the analog, and then creates a completely new entity and a new quality. And I was also wondering, Karel, how you relate to that, because Velasco was also talking a little bit about the symbolic charge of the images and how we weave images as symbols together and then create this new meaning. But I think your films often almost go to this area of synesthesia, where they actually mix different stimuli and different senses together. And there is this incredibly pronounced role of music as well. But we often have this juxtaposition of humans and the decaying tape and images that come from very different sources and and I think like materiality, they also have like very different materiality.
And to add with the indebtedness of cinema to photography, as Velasco was saying, that's a thing, Karel, that I also see a lot in your work, where you often just work also with still photography, but then through the treatment of the material, movement kicks in either through the editing or through the almost alchemic processes that you apply to it.
Yes. So first about the sign and semiotics, that's what César was talking about. I'm also really interested in that because kind of my sort of ultimate aim is to create a sort of cinema beyond the human, which is a sort of impossible thing to do, because cinema is a kind of very human thing and a sort of human language. But I find it very interesting to sort of try to explore that idea. Is there some kind of, and you can even go back to language. You can say like, okay, maybe we have to kind of start there, because language is seen as a human invention and also something which is exclusively human. But at the same time, we all know that animals and plants also communicate, but they do this in a different way. But we create this sort of barrier between us and the others and say like, oh, but our kind of communication is different. You can't compare it. And I'm what I find very interesting is to try to somehow sort of erase this artificial border that we have created. And I try to do that by kind of playing with the idea of the sign, kind of what is it exactly, and kind of where are the sort of limitations, and I involve kind of different types of agency as you wish to kind of create those signs. So that's that sounds maybe kind of very kind of abstract and hermetic. But kind of what I mean is, in the case of photography, I'm using plants to make these images kind of directly on the photographic material or on the film strip, and then it's very one-to-one. The kind of the plant literally kind of leaves an imprint on the film strip. So it's very direct, it's very concrete, and at the same time, when you project it, it looks like an abstract image. It's kind of, it's not something that people immediately can read and understand. So you have this kind of strange contradiction that is going on. There's something very concrete and very real, and there's something quite abstract and difficult to understand. So I'm very interested in that clash and sort of explore that sort of friction between the two things and bring it kind of go kind of completely into that abstraction, but then also try to find ways to sort of bring it back into something which is more legible, more easier to understand, almost sort of creates a narrative. So that is kind of one, I think that's kind of one answer to the question, or also kind of feeds back into what César was talking about. And then I'm afraid I have to ask you to kind of repeat the second question, because
a thing that Velasco was also mentioning was the indebtedness of cinema to photography, and a thing that I find very striking in your work, and that ties into what Stan was also saying, this synesthesia, this kind of like a overwhelming sensation that can occur when experiencing some of your work, because it combines these still photography with very intense and rapid movements through the film editing, and that adds to the question that Stan was asking about this relationship as well between these analog materials and then maybe a digital way of editing, but also how sound and color and all of these other things kick in to not only have this symbolic representation, but also have this full-on sensory experience that you construct as an artist.
Yeah. Okay. So in a way that sort of also goes back to the what I was talking about, these kind of artificial boundaries that we like to create as human beings, because we also think about our perception as kind of very kind of clearly kind of defined areas. We have eyes and they are for seeing, and we have ears and they are for hearing. And we have a tongue and that's for tasting, and we have a nose that's for smelling, etc. But at the same time, also when you then try to think about how you actually perceive the world, then it's kind of everything comes at the same time. It's not separate. It's kind of one experience, and it can be dull or overwhelming or exciting, and it brings this sort of we can sort of reverse engineer it afterwards and sort of explain it and analyze, and then we use these kind of separations, like I see this, and there's the color red, and I hear this sound, and so you sort of analyze it and then compartmentalize it. But that's not kind of how we actually perceive the world. So our brain is also if you look into sort of neuroscience, like cutting edge neuroscience, also scientists say it's not so clear cut. There's sort of cross-modal activity in the brain. The different areas communicate together. It's kind of very much a sort of network of different things that happen. So I find that also kind of really interesting, and then that it's kind of that sort of those kind of theories and concepts. It's great to kind of take that back into the cinema, because in the cinema something similar happens. You also have this sort of experience which is much more than just seeing and hearing. You can also touch cinema, you can taste it, and I like to kind of try to find ways to kind of accentuate that, to sort of really kind of for the viewer or for the audience, that they have this sort of experience where it takes them out of their normal sort of analytical way of kind of seeing something, which that is just a sort of experience that comes, and you can't actually kind of separate things nicely anymore. So that's the kind of synesthesia that you're talking about.
And I'm wondering, César, how you would relate to that, because your cinema, I think, pays tribute to a lot of this classical surrealist filmmakers. We can find traces of, I think, Luis Buñuel, but you also made a film that was a tribute to José Valdelomar, who is a Spanish filmmaker who made this trilogy of elements. And he was very keen on evoking this tactile sensations in his cinema. So I'm wondering, how do you relate to that question of tactility, of senses, and activating different senses through the film?
Okay, yeah, well just a brief introduction. Valdelomar was interested in, well, he had this trilogy, Elemental Triptych of Spain, which had three different films: Aguaspejo Granadino, Fuego en Castilla. Aguaspejo Granadino is like mirroring in Granada, because it's based on the Alhambra and the water and the reflections, right? And then there's Fire in Castile, and A Cariño Galaico is like lack of love in Galicia, with a difficult translation. But in a way, he covers the Aristotelic elements, because the first one is water, the second one is fire, and the third one is earth in Galicia. And so there was only one element left, which is air, and his director of photography, no, Buruaga era...
No, su nuero, tío.
His brother-in-law was...
Bueno, o sea, es el que se casó con su hija, perdón.
Yeah, his daughter's husband. He said that air was lacking because he lived in Madrid, and that's where he died in an accident. Well, that's just a brief introduction. Regarding tactility, the only alchemist that's been in Spain is José Valdelomar in history. There's a term that Romain Gauvain, the theoretist, used to use regarding him, and he would say we're calling a mecamistic, a mixture between mechanical and mystic.
O incluso cinemista, es que ahora ya. Pero bueno.
Cinemistic, to another play on words. So, well, cinema and alchemy are very related because, well, alchemy has a material part and a spiritual part. There's two stages. One is working with the elements, and the other one is achieving a creative force of purification. So, okay, so continuing with the parallelism, the analogy with alchemy, in cinema you have two stages, like just as we were talking before about combining the elements and the act of creation. In cinema you have the shooting part, and then you have the editing part. The shooting part is when we combine all the elements, put them in front of the camera, and we have this process of combining them all together. And if you see the credits of a film, you see all the people involved there and the huge effort, the tremendous effort of communication and coordination of all those elements, and it's like a sort of an inventory or cinema of like ashtrays, spoons, houses, all sort of objects. No, it is a true inventory.
Sería lo más parecido como una especie de materia confusa, ¿no?
It's like a matter in chaos.
Ese es el espacio de producción.
Okay, so then when you're shooting the film, you have the reality that's captured there, all those elements come together, but also there's the crew that you don't see that's behind, and then it's the production space, and where, for example, in the studio cinema from the 1940s, maybe you would see like the image, what you would see, what a spotlight would project light on the hair of someone, and you could identify that there's a spotlight nearby that's projecting that light. Or maybe, for example, when you can see four shadows, in a character, they project four shadows, and there's a production space there that's creating that impact in the image. Okay, so regarding that performative work, there's different ways of creating meaning. Some directors think in terms of a single shot. That's something that happens within that. It's isolated, and there's a sort of progression within that frame and that shot. And then others think more of that in terms of like a trilogy, where you have three shots. Is the shot where you've come from, the shot where you are, and the shot where you're going to be. And that's a sort of creating meaning. But going back to that shooting stage, it's a recreation of the world with a huge effort. And then once you have those shots, that elements you've collected on camera, there's the sound part, which is, I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that, but it's such a complex and rich and really difficult thing to process. So then a lot of sound is added in post-production, which means we have two different times. The time of the shot of the scene, and then the time of the sound that's been added, which it can create a sort of dissonance, and that's why some radical directors believe in pure direct sound to avoid that sort of dissonance. So when you've devoted your whole life to cinema, you start to think about it as it's like a creature, like an animal that feeds on humans. It's like a sort of God that is really demanding, and sometimes he blesses humans, and sometimes he just kind of damns them or condemns them. So cinema is a sort of technology. It's a technology that has a life of its own, and it like consumes. Its uses. I like to think about that in terms of like the cocaine plant, which it's never had more cultivation surface, And that plant, which has been growing and becoming present everywhere, areas that haven't been covered before in history, that plant is actually devouring humans. It consumes, it feeds on humans. It's from the people that harvest it, to the people that consume the coke, to the people that die from a shot in the head. So in a way, we could say that that plant is feeding on us, and that's the kind of the metaphor of cinema too.
On that note, I think it's interesting maybe now to make a bridge to Karel, because I'm wondering, in your practice, Karel, how important is it what particular plants you're using and what qualities those plants might have? Like Cesar just spoke about the cocaine. And I'm wondering if for you, those plants are just reduced to those chemical qualities, or do they also come with certain symbolic charge and symbolic meaning in your filmmaking?
Of course, in the end, there's the symbolic meaning as well. But what is more important for me is this kind of translation from the still image to the moving image. Because what I do is, in fact, direct animation. The people know filmmakers like Len Lai and McLaren, who painted and stenciled and scratched on films and so on. So kind of what I do is, in fact, a kind of similar thing. But because I use the plants, and it's kind of one-to-one what you get, it's very important, kind of the size of the plant and also kind of its appearance. And then kind of how it sort of coincides or doesn't coincide with a film frame, because a film frame is a fixed thing. And so when you want to create some kind of movement, something that looks on the screen as something that we as humans then kind of recognize as movement, it needs to be a kind of a particular size or has a particular structure. So that's kind of what I'm very much focused on, and kind of experiment with that, and just try things out, but also kind of through by doing it a lot, getting a lot of experience, and kind of at some point knowing kind of how I can create a certain movement or a certain pulse or a certain vibration on the screen. And so that kind of makes me look in much detail to the plants. So that's kind of how I get to know them more in a sort of more intimate way, if you wish. So I'm less interested in the sort of symbolic meaning that we give to plants as human beings. I'm more kind of interested to explore them on their own terms and see what those plants actually can bring me. I have to kind of, because I'm sort of I can't kind of dictate anything there. The plant is a sort of given, so I have to try to kind of make the move toward the plant and kind of see what can you do with me. It's a sort of question. What can you do for me?
And additionally, I think it would be interesting to also ask and explore your curation and selection and employment of the photographic or cinematographic material that you use, which is, of course, also not arbitrary, but comes from varied sources. For instance, with a film like Liquidator, you have access to some film material that is discovered by the Netherlands Film Archive. It's old 1920s footage from Haarlem, a city in the Netherlands, just outside of Amsterdam. But then, for instance, with a film like Dark Matter, there's photography, photographs of the archive of your family, of your father as well. So it immediately, the emotional connection maybe to you as an artist in that film changes through the selection of those photographs. So can you talk maybe a little bit about how the films or the photographs that you select also influence the process that you employ to work with them in your work?
Yeah, it's very true. Kind of what you mentioned, the dark matter is much more kind of concerned with the symbolic. Yeah, I sort of give myself the freedom to do different things. So kind of in that way, kind of my work is a bit sort of meandering through kind of different ways of kind of filmmaking and approaching filmmaking. It's kind of the liquidator that you mentioned. That's kind of the where the kind of these kind of more recent explorations with the materiality and that sort of more alchemic process with plants. That's where it started, because the way that kind of image, that film print that they found, it was literally eaten by bacteria and fungi. So this is what the archivists call biodeterioration. So it's kind of literally something grows on the film. That kind of also kind of could feed back nicely in what César was just talking about. So there's maybe something stronger. If cinema is eating humans, there's also an even stronger entity that's eating the film. And that was kind of my focus. I was very kind of interested in that, kind of this idea of something that is alive, on literally in this case on the film.
Now I'm kind of curious what it would look like if Karel Doing would work with César Velasco's film material. What kind of result that would lead up to?
Yeah, I'm intrigued now. I definitely am going to look at César's work, because I'm not familiar with it. So yeah.
And César also has credits as editor for other directors. And actually, this is another component of filmmaking that I wanted to ask you about, because I think that's very particular to film alchemy, which is time as one of the ingredients of the mix, of the mixture, because it's easy to imagine like all these other factors that we've been mentioning, cast and scenography and sets and lights and everything else, as an ingredient of a concoction that in the end becomes a film. But I think one very unique aspect of cinema is the ability to play with time. And none of your films are straightforward linear narratives. So I wanted to ask you both actually about your approach to time and manipulation of time in your filmmaking. Maybe César, if you could address this one.
So first of all, I'd like to clarify that in a way, shots are linear in terms of time. Each individual shot is that kind of footprint or fingerprint of time. And I think we first have to distinguish between what is a shot and what is the representation of something that we do, combining different shots in a different order, if we want to show time in a different way, if we want to maybe use like a parallel editing, or maybe we want to play with shots as a cause and effect, or put the effect before the cause, or if we're working with synchronicity. For me, time in cinema is the moment where the camera starts rolling and you're capturing with an intention as a moment in time. That's my definition. That's first thing I'd like to say. Okay, well, in terms of narrative and representation, which I'm interested as a creator. I've not been interested in what is a narrative as an audience. Storytelling, ¿no? Es que narrative es relato, but whatever. But I'm a very good audience, because I'm interested in the storytelling part of things, and I give really good ratings on Letterboxd on the films, because after all, I'm a servant of cinema. I'm kind of a toil for it. So in that way, I enjoy most of cinema, but I'm talking as a creator. Continue with that. I would say this is a bit false what I'm saying, but it does have certain meaning. Is when I work with, I'm not like a story-driven filmmaker. So what I do is I work with the sense of rhythm and how those shots and images are articulated, and they create like a consistent continuum. But then after that, as a consequence, as the outcome of that, as a sort of story and narrative starts to emerge from it, and it's something that it's like a sort of accident. And I started to work with the editing. I tried to iron out the dissonances that the audience is going to find, and that leads to a sort of very, very clear kind of storytelling or story in the film that I'm making, and that's what happens with my own films. But when I work as an editor, and this is another remark, I think there are people that say, oh, once you have the shots, you can order them in any way you want. It's just a matter of personal preference. And I believe that the materials you have have their own demands, their own requirements on how they need to be edited, and only someone despisable and with very low morals could say, oh, I can put this in this way or another, it doesn't matter. No, I think that material sometimes can only be edited in a single optimal way.
I think we can also apply the question to Karel, or I'm very interested how you see that relation with time in your work and how it kind of informs the way that you also edit and construct your films and your film work.
Yeah, I think cinema is a kind of beautiful contradiction, and on the one hand, it's very linear. You go into the cinema, the lights go out, the film starts. You can measure it. The film is 90 minutes long, and then it ends, and the lights go on again. So it's very kind of rational, simple to explain. It's linear. But at the same time, this is absolutely not true, because within a film, you can go back in time, you can go forward in time, you can speed things up, you can slow things down, you can do almost anything. And it's also kind of it sort of stretches or condenses our experience. You can go and see a film and you can have the feeling that it happens, like it's almost like a dream. It happened in an instant. The film is over before you even realize it, and it's like, what? It's already kind of the end, or kind of of course, the opposite can happen as well. That it feels like that it goes on for hours and hours. So as a filmmaker, you can try to kind of play with that, it's a very interesting aspect. And then I'm also kind of again more interested in the sort of, let's say, more abstract approach of that experience. That it's not so much about, I'm not so much interested in clock time, but I'm much more interested in this kind of inexplicable way that you can experience time. So I try to find that through kind of the different experimental techniques, and also, of course, editing and the kind of what you were kind of referring to earlier, the combination of music and image. That is very important as well. I don't have like a clear-cut methodology there. I don't have kind of rules that I follow. It's very much a process of improvisation, kind of trying things out, seeing what works and what doesn't. Kind of what I do know is that the moment that I would take you to an exhibition and we would look at a series of abstract paintings, I often have this sort of experience that I'm in front of a painting and I see a lot of things. I immediately see a lot of things and I start to talk about it, and the person next to me is like, I didn't see anything. So I'm somehow I have this sort of sensitivity to these kind of things, and that I use very much also in the editing process and kind of the bringing together of moving image and music to I have a very strong sort of imagination there. So I try to use that, and then to what I said, by trial and error, and also by kind of the sort of experience that I've been building up throughout the years of kind of understanding how a broader audience kind of relates to these kind of forms of cinema, and then it's sort of a bit easier to kind of start to see what works and what doesn't. But again, I don't have like a clear set of rules. I couldn't sort of it would be hard to teach this to somebody and say like, okay, this is what you have to do to achieve that.
Just to clarify, when I was talking about time in a linear way, I was talking about that moment in the shot where the camera start rolling and the shot ends. And no, I'm not talking about the intervention on the material afterwards, okay? Because once you have that shot, that can only go forwards or backwards. You can slow it down, but it's the time that's happened when you've kind of recorded that shot. You've shot the film, and it's like if you have the fossil of a dinosaur, you can sculpt it and give it another shape. Okay, but that's not the original time that's been recorded there. And I have this book which is a script from Alain Guénet from Muriel, and he does a reflection on about how the past affects the present, and at the same time, the present is going to condition the future. And his film, like Je t'aime, it's a non-linear film too. And I have this theory is that a film isn't really over, isn't really truly finished until all the people that have made that film have died. Okay, all the crew, the directors, everyone. Until that moment happens, and I was watching the other day Jacques Tourneur's "I Walk with a Zombie." Is the original name of the film, and I was thinking the only survivor there is that probably it's the baby that's in the film that maybe he's 90 years old, no, and I keep thinking about how that I was talking about how that cinema feeds on everyone, and thinking about Hollywood actors, for example, where you can see someone when he was young and then when he was older, and you see Al Pacino and his decay and how they struggle and have those plastic surgery to keep up with it. And if it were for me, I would just allow people to feature once in a film, so they could exist only at that point, and we couldn't have that cruelty of cinema with people and with time.
It's a beautiful metaphor of cinema as a vampiric force feeding off humans, or a cocaine plant, as we heard it from César before. Because our time is nearly over, and Karel, I think, will have to leave us very soon. I wanted to thank you both for accepting our invitation and featuring on that podcast. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you both at Imagine, where everybody interested will be able to join Karel's phytography workshop and try this technique of developing films using the plants and the essence of the plants. And César is going to appear in a couple of instances. We're going to have a screening of his movie Alegrias Riojanas. We're also going to have exhibition of César's works that are related both to Alegrias Riojanas and his feature film in development, The Future Testament. So we're going to be able to follow and go on a guided tour through that exhibition, also in César's presence, and also in one of the alchemy-related screenings. We're going to have a talk between one of our programmers and César regarding Vas du Nos, the Belgian classic film. So please bear with us and come to all those events at Imagine. And if you're listening to it after Imagine, maybe that's just going to add some extra context to those things that you've done or seen.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your insight, and your experiences. It was a pleasure to listen to you both, and very much looking forward to experience your work at the Imagine Film Festival.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was an episode of the Imagine Film Festival podcast exploring the theme of fantastic alchemy, hosted by us, Stanisław Liguzinski
and Hugo Emerzaal. This podcast series is produced by Ines de Co and edited by Tom Ooms.
If you're listening to this before our upcoming festival edition, we invite you to come join us at Imagine Film Festival, taking place in Lab 111 and Filmhallen from the 25th of October to the 4th of November 2023. Check our website at imaginefilmfestival.nl for the complete festival program, or follow Imagine Film Festival on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
Thank you for listening, and make sure you tune in to the remaining episodes of the podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.